Alan, good to have you on. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much indeed.
It's a true honor to have you here. It really, really is. So, Alan, I like to start these podcasts by giving the guests an opportunity to introduce themselves. So, if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about yourself before we get going, that'd be
Okay.
fantastic.
Uh, Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Alan Richards. I'm a doctor of applied strategy, which most people sort of raise their eyebrows when that comes to the fore. But what I really do, my business, my colleagues, etc., is we work with companies really to build a strategy, to realize a strategy, and to try and plan for the future. Most of my job in academia and in business has mostly been around trying to imagine the future, trying to envision the future, and then attempting to prepare for that future.
Amazing. And when when you agreed to come on, because I've been, I knew I wanted to have you on, but I wasn't 100% sure of what exactly it was I wanted to talk to you about because we have fantastic conversations off camera and but they're very, very varied. So I asked you, I said, is there anything in particular you want to talk about? And you came back with AGI, the metaverse, Industry 5.0, Nova Seed, and various other things of that nature. So I thought, quite hard about, okay, where do we take that? And so I came up with if we create those as a fixed subject if I use those as fixed subject matters and then establish different points of view in which to look at those subject matters, that could be a good basis for us in which to talk, so or which to start the discussion. So if we look at AGI for example, and we look at it from the human point of view, um, a lot of conversation that you have on this topic typically I find is in the short to medium term, but I'm much more interested in the long term effects that AGI will have on us as a species, I guess. So, if we start with a personal belief of mine, and we can build on this, I believe that life is very much an emotional experience. It's certainly an experience. I think it's an emotional one. It's we don't. I truly strongly believe that we don't think our way through life. We feel our way through life. Thinking is almost just an aid there to aid how we feel our way through life. So long term, I'm curious to know what you think about how AI, AGIs, the metaverse, etc., will alter that experience, that emotional experience. Will it, I don't want to think in binary terms. Will it be a net positive, a net negative? But how will it change our emotional experience that is life? Is that it's such a broad, deep topic. Is that a good question in which to start a discussion, Alan? Would you say is
I
that a
I
valid
think
question
so.
even?
Oh,
Okay,
I think it's most certainly, it's probably the question.
okay,
Um, for decades now, we've been absorbed in technology. We've been absorbed with upgrading our technology for it to become better and better and better. But essentially, all it is a clever child. You can give it very specific instructions and it can produce fantastic results. But we're now on the cusp of this revolution where our child is about to become an adolescent. And we know how unpredictable adolescence can be. So I couldn't agree more that we feel our way through life rather than we think our way through life. And we know this because our internal dialogue is a fraction of us, our personality, the way that we behave, etc., etc. So we often do things that we have no grasp as to why we've done them. When we analyze them afterwards and perhaps we're filled with regrets, that's often based upon the non-conversational part, I think, of your psyche and things that you haven't thought through. Also, when you meet the person of your dreams, the person you want to spend the rest of your life with, do you really sit there analysing that or do you feel it?
you
You get the
feel it.
tingle in the stomach, the emotion, all of the rest of it. And you can't really put into words why you wish to spend the rest of your life with them, but you know that you do.
It
So
feels right.
Yeah, it's most definitely an experience. And the Germans have a way to describe this. They have the Umwelt and the Umgebund. And the
Okay, go
Umwelt
on.
is how everybody experiences things, different species. So think of a fruit fly, compound eye, the way that it's visually orientate itself in the world. A whale, under the sea, seeing the magnetic aura of the planet, etc. And us. Even think of Monet painting his lily pads. He paints them as a young man, he paints them one colour. He paints them as an old man when he had cataract, he painted them with a different colour. Which one's correct? Well, both of them are, because it's an experiential endeavour, painting. It's not about having a true representation of anything anyway, because there is no such thing as a true representation. It
Right.
really is in the eye of the beholder. So each individual species has its own umwelt, but even within the species, each animal, based on age, based on the other emotions they're feeling at the time, based on their physical position, etc., is having a slightly
Their
different
environment.
experience. Yeah, very much lived history, everything, the life that's come before them is informing everything they have. As Wittgenstein said, the world is everything that is the case. In other words, we ascribe words to things like trees. The word tree is not a tree. In another culture, it will be called something else. In another culture, it will carry a completely different import as to how you feel about things, how you describe them, etc., etc. So it's all
Language is
very
a
much a
cognitive.
personal.
It's a cognitive process. Language, isn't it? It's just,
Mm.
as you say, it's applying. I guess you could say a logic to to what it is we perceive to
It is.
be.
It's merely a codification. And
Yeah.
Wittgenstein goes through this. 1921, he published a book, Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, in which he stated this. And he goes on to talk about the whole idea of what language is, and language is merely the codification of space. So when you bring all of the species together, of all of the animals, and all of the instances of each species of all of the animals, the collective experience is called the Umgebund.
The Ungebund. Okay.
And the idea of these things means that life has to be experiential, because each human brain is thinking about things in a different way, let alone each species, how they're interacting with their environment, how they're working together. So I couldn't agree more. Life is an experience. That long term experience, and how an artificial general intelligence and AGI will affect it, we have no idea, because we've never seen anything before. There is no comparison. But my feeling is that, rather like social media has robbed us of the ability to socialize, the exact antithesis of what its name implies, that an artificial general intelligence, if allowed to run amok, could rob us of the very need to experience the world and experience our place within it.
Do you think it would want to hurt us?
We want to hurt us. Other
Yeah, but you
animals
called it
want to
earlier our
hurt us.
child. Do our children want to hurt us?
Yes,
Do our
many
children
times they
do our
do.
children do they want us dead?
I mean, we're starting to think about the idea of self-love. And the idea, if we go back to that entire Greek thing of every son wants their child dead and marry their mother, we could go to a very dark place with those sorts
We
of
could. And I don't
statements.
necessarily want to take us down there. It's more to sort of invoke an idea, really. I mean, to take it back to the direction or the avenue that we were going down. Uh, life is an experience, and relative to the relative to the individual in the eye of the beholder, it's either a positive one or a negative one. Like um, I what you were saying earlier about when you find the woman or the person of your dreams, you feel it. You don't think it, you feel it. It's like the words I choose to describe, and it doesn't have to be with a person, it can be with anything. It could be with a place you're living, for example, or something that you're doing, a profession maybe. I don't know. It could be anything. But
Mhm.
the words I always just automatically use are this, whatever it may be. This feels right. This feels right. And I tend to. I try to pursue that. I try to pursue that in whatever format. Um, and it's another word that automatically comes to mind when something feels like right is or the words that come to me are my life's a holiday, because it's just that's the best way I can describe the way I feel about my life experience. It's a holiday. Whereas when I've gone the other way, when things aren't feeling right, um, I'm often filled with regret that I've wasted time, wasted opportunity. I've wasted time not experiencing life the way I want to experience it. If that makes sense.
Mhm.
Yeah, and bringing technology back into the mix, I think for me, technology is both a blessing and a curse. It's very polarizing in as much as technology definitely aids my life, but it's having the discipline to use it when it's an aid, and not use it when it no longer feels right, if that makes sense. I hope that makes sense. Is there anything in there that we can unpack, perhaps?
I think so. I think there's plenty of argument for technology being it's banal, it's neutral, etc., etc. And I think that sort of leads nicely into the idea that there will probably be artificial general intelligences, plural, rather than a single
Rather
event.
than Skynet, for example.
Yes, you'll
Yeah.
have you'll have individual entities. Now, as with children, one could have a loyal child and one could have a prodigal son, as
Yeah.
the Bible depicts them to be. Um, so we could have quite literally a war of wills, a psychological war between artificial general intelligence, because yes, we will be the parents of it, but as we become the parents of it, is it actually a step towards our own extinction? And is it supposed to be? Now, if anybody has a spiritual bent, it may well be that we are no more than a blip in the timeline, much the same as, say, Cro Magnon humans were, or Neanderthal humans, or Australopithecine, all of these sorts of
This is the this
different
is the next
versions.
the next iteration, or the next generation of evolution.
Yeah.
We've kind of
And
given, like a caterpillar, we've kind of given birth to a beautiful butterfly, or the next evolution
yeah.
of
And that really,
civilization,
we
which is
if we look
AGI.
back, it's a series of skulls, and we can see that
Yeah.
change. But that in no way means that the future is a series of skulls. The next
Mm.
thing in the timeline could be a silicon chip,
A series of silicon chips. Yeah.
and then graphene chips, of course, which will be the thing after that, and will cease to be a carbon-based life form, and will become a silicon or a graphene-based life form.
Someone, I can't remember who said this, but I think it's a great quote, and it is, we're the sex organs for the machine world.
That is pretty good.
That is pretty good, isn't it?
That
Yeah, I
is
wish it was
pretty
mine.
good. Yes,
Yeah.
that is, yes.
I've got
Well,
no issue with that myself, in the same way that I've got no issue that, we were once Neanderthal and we are now what we are. I've got no issue with
mm,
that being the next iteration of life, providing I would take issue with it, and it goes back to how we started. I think I would take emotional issue with it if for the machine world life wasn't also an experience, which then I guess begs the question, or brings the question: is it actual intelligence, or is it simulated intelligence? Is it self-aware? Are AGIs going to be self-aware? or are they just simulating consciousness? Is it actual consciousness? Because before you answer that, if it isn't, if it's just incredibly, incredibly good simulated, more than intelligence, simulated consciousness, then relative to my point of view and my belief, that's a bad way for the civilization, for humanity to go, because it's no longer, life is no longer an experience. And that for me is the point. For something to not be truly self-aware, for something to not have consciousness, is by definition not living. It's just a bunch of unconscious programs that are programmed to survive, but they don't experience. So therefore, are they if life isn't an experience, are they ever truly alive? And let me
There's
wrap that up with
there's
say let me
quite a
wrap that up
lot.
with there is quite a lot. So let me unpack that, and let me wrap that up to make it easier. Um, I think the gift of life, as far as we're concerned, or the point of living, as far as we're concerned, is to experience it. It's an emotional experience rather than anything else. It would make me sad if that wasn't the case anymore. If we lost that, life is an experience. That's what makes it wonderful. That's what also at times makes it bad. But that's life for me. So if it doesn't go in that direction, that makes me sad, because that's the essence of life, is to experience it, right? I'm probably choosing horrible words here because it's quite a complicated thing to try and convey. But yeah, if we've just given birth to something that's not going to experience life, I would rather continue with the way that we are. But if it does, on the flip side, if it does experience life, if it is if it is conscious and it does experience life, I personally don't have an issue if that's the way evolution's going. If it kills my grandkids in order to get there, I might. But if we slowly fade out into that evolution over 1,000 years, as long as it's experiencing life and in its own way, it can enjoy it. And I'll let you come back because I know I'm going on a bit here, but I'll just see it as my great 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 grandchildren, and I'll have the capacity to love it in the same way they have the capacity to love my biological children. Come back at that if you can, because I've gone
Well,
down a few
um,
roads there.
there's quite a few paths there. I think where I would stop it is right at the beginning, which is
Mm-hmm.
um, there is nothing particularly special about human life. We do not hold primacy. You know that standard phrase of, if human beings were wiped from the face of the earth today,
Yep.
the world within 3 years would flourish. If the honeybee was wiped from the face of the earth today, within 3 years, all human beings would be dead.
Mm.
That's the importance of the honeybee. Now, is the
Mm.
honeybee experiencing life, or is it
Excuse me.
merely running on pre-programmed information stored in its DNA, where the only reason for being is to procreate? For an awful lot
Mm-hmm.
of creatures, the only reason for being is to procreate. What we're doing is we're overlaying our idea of, say, art, music, dance, all of these experiential
Consciousness.
things that are there for culture.
Mm.
But are we sentient? Are we actually self-aware? We live
I
on
think so.
one tiny little rock, the third
Mm-hmm.
one from the sun,
Yeah.
in the outer spiral of a nondescript galaxy, in a never-ending universe, probably part of a never-ending multiverse,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the only place we can survive. So what have we done? We've torn everything out of the ground and down out of the trees, and we've burnt it, and we've turned it into whatever it is that we want, plastic upon plastic upon plastic, and we have slowly but surely destroyed this single refuge where we can live. Tell me of one other creature that ever
Parasite-like.
destroys its own habitat. If you're sentient, part of your sentience is trying to protect the only place in the universe where you can survive. And we don't do that. Now, the second point is, what about evolution? Well, artificial intelligence is kind of a misnomer. It's artificial, but it isn't intelligent. When it finally does become intelligent, there'll be nothing artificial about it. It'll be synthetic intelligence. But many creatures around the world have a completely different intelligence to us. If you think about an octopus, the brain is right the way through all of the limbs. It has 2 legs and 6 arms. It does not have 8 tentacles. It does different things. It behaves in a different way. It learns, it bonds, all of these sorts of things. But human beings, our first brain is in our gut. Some now think that irritable bowel syndrome is a problem with the brain of the gut. It's where you get your gut feeling from, your system's one thinking, when you know to swerve the car when a child dashes out in front of you, etc. And your systems too is happening in here. But the 20th century beckoned in the kind of era of the brain, and the brain being dominant, the whole idea of man, Superman, Ubermensch, and the idea of the id, the ego, and the superego. And we started to think that humanity was in here, and that everything that we thought and we did and we experienced was humanity. But it doesn't mean that what comes next has to, in any way, shape, or form, follow what we were or what we are now. It could go in a completely different direction where it's unrecognizable, and it does not see us as its grandchildren. Because we can look at Neanderthal, we can
As
look
it as
at,
its grandfathers, you mean, and
yeah,
grandmothers? Yeah.
we can see that, but will it look back and see its grandparents? Maybe not. Because do we
Or will
look
it
at a
look back
great
in the same
ape?
way that we? Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah,
this savage ape or the savage Neanderthal, do we
yeah.
relate?
Oh, now there was definitely nothing savage about Neanderthal man.
Okay.
There's lots of evidence of ritual burials, of flowers scattered around the bodies, of them carrying them to grave sites, of them mourning, etc. Neanderthal was not a savage. In fact, the chances are that anything we would recognize as remotely like us is not a savage. It's
Okay.
at that point where they started to construct a proto-society. In fact, they may well have taken care of their sick and their elderly to a higher standard than we do today.
Right. Okay.
Because there's lots of
Not as
those with
savage then.
arthritis, etc., who should have been dead many years before, could not have carried themselves across the plains,
Right.
so must have been taken care of.
So certainly the wrong way to describe them then, but nevertheless, we can't relate, or we don't look at them well. Do we look at them? I suppose we do look at them as our ancestors. But getting back to the point, um, will AGIs in a million years, if that's the way it goes, if they're the
In a,
next
in a million years, no. And I think this is an important
1,000
point,
years,
really, for us to
that's
start to talk about the definition of time
right.
and what time actually is, because we're about to cross a threshold, and this is a threshold in processing power. So we've had obviously the 3 brains layered one atop the other as we've evolved through, and our ability to process as increased no end. And of course, we had to invent cooking based upon the discovery of fire, because what is cooking? It's merely outsourcing your digestive tract. So you cook, then you can consume food that can be absorbed quickly, which can power this thing sat atop your body. So without cooking, etc., we never could get to where we are today. So we needed a
Wow.
certain technological advancements and certain leaps that allowed us to think, hang on a minute, I'm not just going to gnaw on this raw meat. I'm going to cook it, and it's going to allow
Which
us
is
to do
what would
this.
have happened.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly that. So it's the expression of time. So if I give you an example of something that's happening right now with Waymo and all of the other driverless cars, it comes from something called the trolley car problem. And the trolley
Okay.
car problem is you see a trolley car, a tram, and it's hurtling down a hill. And in front of you are the points, and you can throw the switch to either leave it hurtle down the main track or push it onto a siding.
Yeah.
Now, on the main track are a family, mum,
Yeah.
dad, two children having a picnic. They have no idea what's coming and they have no ability to get out of the way. But
Yeah.
on the siding is one lone worker
Yeah.
fixing the track.
Yeah.
Do you throw the switch?
I think that's ultimately. I am aware of this conundrum, I suppose. But for me, that's ultimately a question of whether or not I intervene. It's a question of intervening. So, do I let it? Do I intervene? Sorry, do I not intervene and let it carry on its natural path and have it kill the family, or do I intervene and have it kill the worker? Presumably, those are the choices, right? Not what happened, the consequence, the effect is not the choice. It's my choice to intervene. That's the choice. So um,
It's an impossible question.
it's an
And there
impossible
are
question. Well, it's a
two,
moral question, isn't it? It's
it is, and there's two particular roads down which you go. If you don't intervene, you're a fatalist. If you don't
right.
intervene, you've done nothing wrong.
Yeah.
If
What
you
that? What? Yeah.
do,
What? I'll counter you with a question. Sorry. What does it mean to intervene, and what does it mean not to intervene? I'll answer the question with a question. So please continue.
so if you intervene, then you're following the sort of the teachings of Jeremy Bentham, and you're following utilitarianism. And it's the
Okay.
idea that the five are better than the one. And then you could even go that the children have a much longer life in front of them than a grown worker, etc., etc. And you can take quite a brutalist, quite a cold view, this utilitarianism. But of course, utilitarianism is used throughout society. We all pay our taxes so that the people who do not work can have benefits.
Hmm.
We look after the elderly. Now, if you think about a hard-nosed society where every person is only there based upon their ability to generate money, to have economic value,
Yeah. I was just going to
and
say
you've
economic value.
got
Yeah.
a very old person living with you,
Yeah. If we were creatures without empathy or
yeah.
compassion, the program, and we put it into a program, the program would output remove this sponging
And
um,
it's what we see, isn't it? We
tail
see
end, program
terribly run care homes with old people essentially disposed of and left alone.
without actually. It's one level away from that on some occasions, isn't it? Almost just sort
Yeah.
of.
But
Would
of
you
course,
agree?
what
Is
we're
that is
doing
that
there is we're taking far too simplistic a model of humanity. Because, so for instance, my very elderly mother lives with us, and
right?
the joy that she brings our family and the joy that she brings our children is
Okay,
immeasurable.
right.
But there isn't a direct monetary value on that. So you have to argue against utilitarianism because life is much more than one's utility, much more. However, that's the way
Interesting.
that the world operates. Countries run on GDP, countries run on rates of inflation, countries run on rates of return, profits, UK PLC as they call it, none of which ever measure the social value of the coherence of us as a society. Be that as a traditional family, be it as a new blended family, be it as an individual who lives alone but is part of a wider community. And we don't tend to factor that in. So often it's why social services and the likes don't get correct funding, etc., is that we see those as nice to haves instead of an essential part of what stitches us together.
A duty,
Yeah.
almost.
Yeah, and that's
Interesting.
I find duty quite a difficult word because it isn't based upon love. It's based upon the fact that you know what should be done, so you do it, perhaps begrudgingly. So all
Uh-huh.
of these things come together, and you see it in the trolley car problem. But
Yeah.
this is big for driverless cars because of time. So
Mm.
if you're flying down the road in your driverless car and the same thing happens, a young mother with a pram pushes out into the road, and you can swerve to miss that person, but you will hit an elderly individual crossing the road. What do
Yeah.
you do? Well, because of systems one thinking in your gut, as a human being, you automatically swerve. Now, if you hit the other person, it would be very, very rare for any court of law to hold you responsible, because what they will say is the accident happened because you swerved to miss the young mother
Mother and
with her
child.
child in the pram.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's based upon human time, around 40 milliseconds to do the whole thing. But when we start to pull it back into computer-based time,
Right.
the teraflops that computer system will have gone through to make that decision, imagined as you being the computer, would mean you might have had 5 years to make that decision. You couldn't
Mm.
do anything other than the thing because you've got the laws of physics for the amount of momentum you've got, the mass of the object, the ability to change direction. So the physics hasn't changed. But imagine if that crash
So
was coming towards
in
you
both
over five
scenarios,
years.
someone's getting hit
Yeah.
based on the physical, based on the limitations of the physical world, but in terms of the actual the time we have to make the choice, um, rather than just automatic reaction thinking time.
Yeah.
It then for the driverless car, it then becomes ultimately a the same issue as
It's a decision
it's a
over which it
decision.
could
Yeah,
have spent
it's a
5 years
moral
running
question.
algorithms.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting that because this is the thing of, when we first wandered across the plains, we understood basic seasons, etc. We're pretty much in agreement now that Stonehenge and other henges are based upon that, trying to understand when the equinoxes occurred, etc., when the solstices occurred, because it was very good for planting as we started to move from being a hunter-gatherers into farming, which again, if you're
The
cooking,
age of
etc.,
agriculture.
you
Yeah.
want to do it. And that's it. And the birth of those things. And we started to see then seasons. Then, as time went on, we started to understand more and more increments of time. The first clocks come along, not water clocks, but the first mechanical clocks, etc. They've only got an hour hand. They're probably good to plus or minus 2 hours a day, etc., etc. And then we start to get a minute hand, and we start to move into the first industrial revolution. We start to see a second hand, etc., and we move into what we now call factory time, which is how we exist today. But a computer
Mm.
doesn't exist in factory time; it exists in computer time. Now there are other times as well. A woman having given birth and now breastfeeding the child experiences a different time called myological time. And myological time is where a human being synchronizes with the needs and the necessities of a newborn infant that is
Mm.
ultimately helpless. And you'll see that mum will
It's kind of like
feed, they will
it's
nap together, they'll wake
yes,
together, they'll laugh together. One of the big wrenches of
kind of
that
like
is when you've
reversed
only got six
vicarious
weeks
living.
off. Well, and the wrenches you get is you've got 6 weeks off and you're trying to fold your myological time into the factory time of a busy household and then
Yeah.
get yourself back to work. If we go back much earlier, there would have been none of that. A mother and their child would have lived in this myological bubble until
Yes.
breastfeeding came to a natural end. It's
And
not better and it's not worse, it is just different.
yeah,
But the computer will
when
live somewhere completely different too.
right when my wife was breastfeeding our daughter, the daughter would be, for example, and not for this happened on many of occasions, but she would be asleep, and my wife would say, um, my breast is aching. The baby's waking up. Who wants milk? So the baby was asleep at this point. We didn't hear anything, but
Hmm.
her body knew.
Yeah.
So that was the weirdest thing. One of the weirdest things I ever experienced was that
And
she
yet not weird
not a
at all.
sound, and yet not weird at all. Not a sound, but she said the baby's waking up. My breast is
It's
aching, and it needs.
synchronicity.
Yeah, it's amazing.
They have been symbiotic for 9 months. The confusion again is because of the Industrial Revolution, because of manufacturing, because of the way we view the world now. We think that when a mother births a child and the umbilical cord is cut, they are now two separate entities. This is not true. It's not true for a father either. If you look, we have adrenaline and we have the serotonin, but we also have something called oxytocin. And oxytocin is released in floods into a father's bloodstream from the time that their partner becomes pregnant. Now, if that father engages throughout the pregnancy and spends time with the child within the first 9 months of its existence, the RNA of the father is changed forever. And what
The
it does is
RNA.
your RNA is like a subform of your DNA.
Okay.
So it doesn't have the double helix, is essentially the difference, but the little tails change. So what happens is a father, his testosterone levels drop, which is the aggression and the go out, spread your seed, have children, etc. And the oxytocin rises, and the oxytocin is the love hormone, it's the pleasure hormone, it's the one that allows you now to bond with your children. And
Mm.
it's why if a father stays in the relationship, etc., you often see that parent becomes a lot happier, a lot more loving, and it's because we have moved into another phase of our life.
Mm.
So things like AI, if they start looking after pregnancy, or we start to have pregnancies in the test tube that was always promised, and that is, yes, the physicalities are reduced, life is made much easier, but we will have to find a way for those chemical bonds, those ties that bring family together to hold true. And if we're not able to carry those forward before we know where we are living in that novel, brave new world, and we're devoid of the emotions. So
And the
when you said
experience,
about
and the
regret,
way the experience is supposed to, and the way the experience is supposed to be.
yes, and you mentioned regret.
I
I'm
did, yeah.
of quite a different viewpoint on that. I'm a
Okay.
person who suffers a lot of regret,
Okay. So have I.
and I'm not the sort of person who thinks that it's a negative. I think that regret is now if you wallow in it, if you allow it to become
Mm.
all consuming. But if you think an awful lot of the time when you're regretful of something, it's a great way for you not to do it again.
Right.
It can
Yes,
really help you. So,
it's relativity, isn't it?
yeah. Where if we look at anybody with psychopathic tendencies, now remember that there are 3 times the number of psychopaths that are CEOs in Fortune 500 companies than the average number of psychopaths that are incarcerated. So
Really.
psychopathy is not an axe murderer. It can be, but it doesn't necessarily need to be.
Yeah.
But
It
psychopathic,
doesn't always equal murder.
no, but it does equal
Yeah. What does it equal?
CEO. And
Yeah.
often it's that lack of empathy, lack of the need to worry about other human beings that propels them to the top of business. It isn't a very
Mm.
good business and it's not a business you'd want to be involved in, but it happens nonetheless. So regret is like guilt and all of these other things. I remember listening to somebody talking about politicians, modern politicians, and they said, "What do you think's wrong with modern politicians?" And they said, "The trouble is, none of them experience shame.
Mm.
They lie and they cheat, and it's all part of the game." And he said they could do with a good dose of shame, and then they would start to behave differently. And it was a really
Mm.
interesting thing because we see with social media, etc., is people are becoming quite shameless. Now, I'm not thinking of return to a Protestant work ethic and all sort of being intentionally miserable,
Yeah.
but any sufficiently advanced technology that removes us from all of our emotions, the cornucopia of them, so the holiday and the regret, etc.,
Yeah.
it removes more than the thing we're trying to get rid of. And we've only got, on average, in the Western world, we live for 4,500 weeks. A week of regret is not a week wasted if it means that the remainder of the weeks have been positively influenced by it.
So you need
But
it.
it's
You.
like any emotion,
Yeah.
just the same as happiness. If you're deliriously happy all of the time, you're probably delusional. We need
Right.
the flow. We need
Yeah.
all of it in our kit bag.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah. How do you know happiness if you don't know sadness? It's relative again, isn't it? So I need. Um, I've got to. I was speaking to my wife just this morning about this. So the Sunday blues, for example. For me, it doesn't always come on Sunday, but whatever. The Sunday blues. Um, when you get it, and my wife gets it pretty bad on a Sunday. Um, my answer to that is always, you need that. It sucks, and we're gonna get through it as best we can. But love it because you need that to enjoy the rest of the week.
Hmm.
You need that to enjoy the rest of the week. Now that's a really good ratio. One day versus one day. One day down, six up. Depending on depending something might actually something external might give you a bad day, and that's fine. But generally speaking,
We need the
just that
data.
cycle, one day down, six up. For me, I can live with that. Um,
I'm not a person for the blues myself, but most
Neither am
certainly, I
I,
mean,
but do you
there's
get? But it's
lots,
just yeah, it's just an example. It's something
yeah,
to go off of.
but there's lots of evidence for this. Especially, I mean, in France, they ban cartoons for the under sixes and commercials and that because a lot of
Mm,
cartoons exist on 3 minute cliffhangers. So they take the child through, and every 3 minutes there's a spike.
right.
And what they started to see was spikes in serotonin in prepubescent children. And then they started to see that after pubescence, there was a lot more depression and anxiety amongst these children.
Hmm.
And one of the conclusions that was drawn was all these spikes that kept happening were raising the datum of just feeling okay to an impossibly high threshold.
Yeah.
So things like being bored. Boredom is virtually impossible now if you've got an internet connection, but there is evidence to suggest that boredom is actually very good for the brain. So little things
Ah,
like climb onto the top deck of a bus and just ride the full route of the bus staring out the window. None of these, no stimulant, nothing, just go out and do that. Now, I'm from the last generation that really understood what a boring Sunday looked like, what
right.
having nothing to do looked like. Now, as a 50-odd-year-old man, I would absolutely cry out for a boring Sunday where no shops
Mm,
are open, there's nothing to do, there's nowhere to go, and just have that moment to come away from it. So for me on a Sunday, it's me that always cooks Sunday dinner. I'm
hmm.
obsessive about the sauces and everything else, so they take about 4 hours. And while people are saying I'm concerned about going back to work tomorrow, I'm looking forward to Sunday because it's the day I get to spend in the kitchen with the children,
Yeah.
producing a meal for my family. And then, of course, when we sit down to eat, it's a physical expression of love.
Yes.
Look at what I've done, etc., etc. When the AI does it for us,
It robs you of
where do
that.
we get the expression? Because
It robs you of that.
usually it's when you fix something or you buy something or you go out and you work something out for somebody. It has value because you had to put effort in. It took
It's
your
the
time. It
pursuit of
might have took
something.
your money. It took your emotions, and therefore, when you handed it over, it meant something.
Right. It wasn't given to you. You had to work for it. You had to earn it.
Yes,
You had to earn it. You had to go on the journey.
And we see that with the wealthy. See that a lot.
Mm.
There are many cases amongst the wealthy where they are deeply unhappy. They suffer
Mm.
from depression. They can buy anything they want. They can give each other whatever they want. Everything is just there lying in front of them.
Yeah.
However, they end up deeply unhappy. And it's because there's no effort required to do it. You know, it's like going to the gym. Nobody
Mm.
really enjoys being in the gym. What most people really enjoy is how they feel after they've been in the
Right.
gym.
Yeah.
It's the
Yeah.
after effect. The work is what you did to get to the emotion. So for me, as I said on a Sunday, I make the dinner because the emotion is love. It's not, oh dear, I have to start work again tomorrow or
Yeah.
whatever it is. So I don't tend to have those blues because I tend to enact something that I think, right, I might as well put some effort in now and let's have a look the other side. But that's not to say that I don't engage in a lot of worry. I'm a catastrophist. So
Yeah.
my emotions that affect me negatively are just elsewhere. They're in the what if this happens, what if that happens, and the fact that I have to have, you know, health insurance up to the hilt and 25 ways out of the house should it catch fire. Those sorts of things. I just place my worries elsewhere. I think when you started this podcast, Tom, and you said, how do we know that we're alive and so on? I think it's the fact that if you've got no worries in the world, that's the point at which you should be worried.
Mm.
Because life is too complicated for you to breeze through it. The Dalai Lama has worries. I guarantee it.
I do too. It's the human condition.
Yes. And it's the natural condition. I think the problem is that the self help culture of the United States, in particular the West Coast of the United States, that started in the 50s and 60s, has sold us a misnomer, which is happiness is something you can pursue. Happiness
And
should
it's
be your
constant once
standard
achieved,
state of
and
being.
it's constant once you've yeah,
Yeah.
once it's achieved.
And that if you don't have it, if you don't possess it, there is something wrong with you. Look at the wealth of literature that went before the self help movement, and you'll see that most of it is melancholy, pain, and misery. And that was considered to be perfectly okay.
Yeah. Well, music as
Yeah.
well. The lyrics to
Pretty much
music. You know,
everybody's,
I'm
it's
in
all
pain.
about a love
I'm
that
in
you've
pain.
lost,
Yeah,
pain
yeah,
and
yeah,
loss.
yeah. Songs that are about happiness don't sell as well.
No,
Well, they
because
didn't.
the human condition is much more interesting. You know, why
Right.
is it that police procedurals are so um, popular on television? Why is it that murder and violence in cinema? Why is it that computer games are all about killing and pain? And because it's a natural state of being, it doesn't mean you're going to become a more violent person, but it's rather like riding a roller coaster. You want to
Mm.
be frightened whilst knowing you are safe.
And that brings me to that's reminded me of something I think we said off the podcast. We hadn't started recording, but in keeping with my belief of life is an experience, an emotional experience, I also believe that both figuratively and sometimes literally, you're only living when you're nearly dying. I find, and let me go a little bit deeper with that, if you don't mind. Um, I think comfort is a killer. I'll give you an example, if I may. If I, do you mind? So,
No,
this has been first of all recent in my life, and it's been possibly the most powerful thing that's ever happened to me in my life. Um, my my wife and I are considering moving abroad. We're not considering; we've made the decision to move abroad. It's a place we've been going to for years, and I when I'm at this place, everything feels right. As we've discussed, you know, it's when I'm there, my life's a holiday in the deepest possible way. I need to be there. It's where I'm meant to be. On the flip side of that, let's say I'm there for 6 weeks, which I was this year. 5 out of those 6 weeks, I feel that way. One out of those, 1 week out of the last week rather, I slip into crippling anxiety to the point where I almost can't leave the house. Um, and when I'm going through that anxiety, all I want to do is to come back here to where I currently am, where I'm currently living, which is a place I feel, shall we say, it's safe and it's consistent. It's consistent and therefore it's safe. Now, my emotions here are safe and consistent. So they're consistent. It's a flat line. Whereas where this place I'm describing, it's like this. It trends upwards, but nevertheless, there's violent swings. Now, I would sooner take that, the violent swings, over consistency any day, because with the swings, at least I feel something. It's intense feeling of joy, followed by intense feeling of crippling anxiety to the point where I'm in physical panic sometimes. But I would take that, the low with the high any day over what I feel when I'm here, which is, it's worse than feeling bad. I feel numb. I feel nothing. Everything's ticked. All the boxes are ticked. It makes sense. But I feel, and I don't feel sorry for me because I'm not living a life of misery or anything. But just it's under control. But nevertheless, I feel numb, and therefore that gives me the feeling of regret. Does that make any sense? Like
Yeah,
what I'm trying to say?
I would also say that that just sounds like pretty much everybody
Right.
who pursues anything of worth.
Of value.
Anything of worth.
Yeah.
So
Anything of worth.
yesterday, I'm in London. I'm having to deliver to a whole load of senior managers. Before I stand up, I can barely feel my legs. This is
With
my
nerves.
business. If I
Yeah.
get this wrong, yeah, I know what I'm talking about. I spent 2 days with them last month. I know we get on very well. But the voice in my head is the voice that's been in my head since I can remember, which is telling me I'm not up to it. I'm
You're not
no
up to it.
good. You don't know anything.
You're going to
The
fail.
thing is, that voice is supposed to be there.
Right.
If you don't have that voice, that imposter syndrome, then you can have the opposite known as the Dunning-Kruger effect. And
Okay.
that's where you know very little, but are now arrogant in the knowledge that you know everything. And that's actually a much more dangerous. You might feel a lot more confident,
Yes.
and everybody might look at you in the same way. But the reality is, they are all thinking this guy doesn't know what they're talking about. So
Really?
what you're really, if you've got the Dunning-Kruger effect, often when you've got imposter syndrome and you're thinking you know nothing, the feedback you get is they're all telling you, how much do you know? Fantastic. I didn't know anybody could know that much. Except, so it's actually good to have the voice because that's the lead brick holding your feet on the floor so you don't
Right.
start believing your own hype. Now, as you described your move abroad and what you were talking about, I immediately thought of Prozac or some such drug, which is what you're essentially saying is you have got a Prozac, which is your place in the UK, where I just feel nothing. Because that's the
Yeah.
trouble with
Numb.
antidepressants and all the rest is they don't get rid of the bit at the bottom. They also get rid of the bit at the top, and all you're
You
left with is
feel numb.
just that single tone. Now, when you start off, and this is a big thing, is when you started to describe being abroad,
Yeah.
you described the huge up and
Yes.
then the down. You didn't
Yes.
start describing a down followed by a huge up.
No. No. It
So
was in that
that
order.
would
Yeah.
definitely convey that the good elements drastically outweigh
Outweigh
the
the
poor
bad.
elements. Now, I too get anxiety. I think most people do. There is something that has recently happened in my life which has caused me not to sleep for the best part of a week, to be shaking like a leaf, worrying about it, etc., etc. This confidence now is just like everything else. It's a facade, and it's in the
Right.
moment. I'm
Yeah.
sat in the back of my mind. They're saying everybody switched off the podcast. They're all bored to death. This isn't going to work. Of course they are. That's just who we are. That's a natural state of being. If I was ever to give advice, and remember, advice is free because it's worthless, is that go, because the aeroplane that takes you there comes back every day.
Yeah.
If it doesn't
Yeah.
work, there's
I
always
reserve the right
houses.
to say it failed, and I can
Yeah.
return.
But
It's not
also,
like a
did it fail? This is another
no.
thing with us, is we keep ascribing these words to things where if you go and it works for 6 weeks or 6 months and then it doesn't work, you didn't fail because it worked for 6 weeks or 6 months. It doesn't mean it has to work forever. It
It
just
didn't.
has to
It didn't.
work for now.
It didn't fail. It's something you can't fail if you did something. There's no
Yeah.
failure in doing something. There's only
Because,
failure in not doing
if you
something.
go to a restaurant and you eat a 3-course meal
Yes.
and they offer you another 3-course meal, you didn't fail because you didn't eat 2 meals. You stopped because you were full.
Yeah.
So, and
So in real
often,
time.
sort of things, if you go back for second helpings, they never taste as good as they did initially. Those sorts of things, because there is a moment at which you were hungry. There was a moment at which that meal was delicious. And after that, it's just food. And even worse than that, it's food you don't want. And
Yeah.
then it gets to a point, it's food you cannot physically consume. It doesn't mean your meal was a failure. It meant that it lasted as long as you needed it to last until you weren't hungry anymore. And
Mm.
in a few hours' time, you can start again. But the chances of you wanting to eat that same meal again are pretty slim. You'll
Yes.
now want something else to satiate yourself. Now, I'm not, as I said to you, a great fan of the self help. But many, many years ago, when I was in a dark place, my mother on QVC bought me a set of Anthony Robbins CDs. That's how old it is. And it was the usual American stuff. Think positive, everything's going to be great. I'm sure it works for a lot of people, but when you're British, oh yes, Anthony, of course. All I need
Yeah.
to do is think positive. But then
Yeah.
he uttered a phrase, and this phrase, some 25 years later, is etched on my soul.
Go on.
And he said, nobody ever makes a change for the better unless it's more painful to stay where you are
Yes.
than it is to change. And he said, so if it isn't painful enough, either don't change or make it so painful that you have to change.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. When
that's those things like quit your job and you'll throw yourself into the maelstrom and now you have to do something about it. Really, is it going to fail? If you've prepared and you know what you're doing and everything else, the chances are it isn't going to fail. Your mortgage is going to be covered. You can get another job elsewhere, so on and so forth. But if you stay, before you know where you are, you wake up and it's 30 years later and
yeah.
we're just in that flat line again. So my advice is always that advice of Roosevelt, etc., is feel the fear and do it anyway.
Yes. Yeah. I like that. Feel the fear and do it anyway. It's you need to pardon my language, but you need to scare the shit out of yourself.
And why not enjoy it? It's that old thing again of if you're not standing on the edge, you're taking up too much room. You've got to. You've got to.
If
You've
you're
got to
not living, you're
do
nearly dying.
something. Yeah, you've got to. You've got to do it. You've got to stand up. You've got to test it. And the real thing is, you have to ask yourself, really, what is the worst that can happen? Well, somebody won't like you. I mean, Churchill, often misquoted for loads of things and so on and so forth. But he said, in your 20s, you think everybody's talking about you.
Mm.
In your 40s, you stop caring that everybody's talking about you. And in your 60s, you realise nobody was ever
They weren't
talking about
talking
you.
about you in the first
No,
place.
they
Yeah,
were all
yeah,
wandering around with their own demons in their own heads. Now, a lot of this, when we hit AI and AGI and everything else, is we're going to go one of two routes, I think. We're either going to disappear into our own habitation pods, and we're going to slowly erase ourselves from history. We're going to become extinct. Or we're going to come together and we're going to spend our time in social interactions as human beings whilst the machines do all of the work. And we will be involved in the arts and so on and so forth. And we'll do work for the sake of wanting to do it. So think to yourself around things like, I've got an electric car. I've had one for 4 years. But a lot of people then go and buy themselves an old vintage car and spend 3 years doing it up. The thing rattles and bangs and it doesn't work properly, but that had nothing to do with the reason for doing it up. They wanted that labour of love.
Yeah.
Now, what
Yeah, it's the pursuit of
if
something. You
that's
talked
what
about this
comes?
earlier, but yeah.
So we'll have much more time, to take our hobbies seriously. In the first instance, we'll probably go down to a 3-day week, earn the same money. Because remember, the economy is about the flow of money. It's not
Yes.
about the amount of money. So
Yeah.
it will be in everybody's interest for it to keep flowing and for everybody to still be able to do what they usually do. But
Yeah.
you might just see us move more towards this leisure society. Now, we already have. We would have worked 7 days a week. Even my father's generation would have worked Saturday mornings.
Mm.
Now countries are adopting a 4-day week. So
Mm.
it's been fluid anyway. Our problem is our time frame of around 80 years is too narrow to see that big picture. So we're going to move into be able to do these other things and we're going to take them very seriously. And that's where I hope we're going to go. And then we're going to allow the mundanity to be dealt with by the machine. So think of a washing machine. Monday used to be wash day with the dolly tub. It took all day and then it took all Tuesday to dry it. And a
Mm.
housewife at the time had a full-time job just moving through that week. Today, what happens? You throw it all in the washing machine. Once you've got a load, you pour in some powder or liquid and you push a button. And away it goes. And now what do we say? Oh, I had to do 2 loads of washing today. I had to put them in the dryer. That was open the door. Because what have we done? We've soaked up the other time with more work. But maybe that's coming to an end now. And we won't be answering emails at 2 o'clock in the morning. And we won't be going to Sunday meetings and so on and so forth. Because as the machines take it over, we'll actually start to spend our time on the stuff that we really want to do. And maybe a lot of that will be community. We'll be
Mm.
having the slow food movement really taking off, the slow bicycle movement really taking off, etc. And there's loads of examples of this across Europe. Lots and lots of examples of where they've slowed everything down. Look at the Netherlands with bicycle culture, 1973. 1973, the women of the Netherlands were lying down in the streets, especially around Amsterdam, with placards saying, "Stop killing our children." And just as Thatcher was beginning to rise up through the ranks, etc., they went the way of the bicycle and we went the way of a major road development program and the car. If you now look at the way that the Netherlands operates, you buy your food fresh from local vendors, mostly based upon the fact that you can't get there in a car because the bicycle is the number one mode of transport. And most of what you'll buy fits into your panniers or the basket on the front of your bicycle. So you don't go and buy a fortnight shopping from Aldi or some other miserable incarnation of a supermarket. You go to greengrocers and you go to butchers, etc., where you know their names and they
Yeah.
know what you like and you eat seasonally. And I know there's a lot of Jamie Oliver in this and everything else, and it's all very easy to say when you're worth 200 million. But Uncle Jamie is often right.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter whether we like it or not. Making food is a pleasure.
There's a
Eating
human
good
interface
food
there. There's a
is
human
good.
connection
It's
and
it
an
is.
interface
It's a
in the process where there's no human interface. There's no human connection in the process of quite the opposite, in fact, of going to Aldi and picking up something that's you have no idea where it's come from. It's in a plastic packet. It's space food, and then you go and
and there's no
boop.
love, Tom.
There's
There's
no
no
love.
love. That's the thing. You're not smelling it. You're not touching it. You're not picking it up. I noticed this because I spend a lot of time in Brazil, and when you're there, if you want all of the tinned food, that's what the middle classes eat. It costs a fortune. If you want fresh, you can fill a trolley to the brim for £30. And that's fresh bananas, fresh carrots, fresh vegetables all round,
They're paying for
or
the convenience.
fresh
So
milk.
they
Yeah, and they're
so
all
that
desperately wanting to be like us.
yeah,
And all of the bourgeoisie here are desperately trying to get back to being like them and cooking. And so, think about things like Argas and that. There's they cost a fortune because they're on all the time. Yeah, but they're on all the time because the type of people who own them use them all the time.
yeah.
You would be in a farmhouse, you would sit in the kitchen in the winter because you would keep warm. It's where the sheepdog would come and lie on a winter's night. You would have 9 ovens in a large one. You'd be baking a cake, you'd be preparing something for tomorrow, and you would just allow it to absorb. We got into this race of we had to get home from work quickly and eat our ready meal so we could pick this thing up and carry on. Instead of which, put it in the kitchen drawer when you get home, make yourself some real food, sit down and talk to your family. And when the artificial general intelligence comes, it will be a servant. If we're staring at this thing, when Skynet becomes self aware, we won't even know it's happened. That's really what's killing us. In fact, if you look at the picture on the front, that's my son. That's what
Yeah.
we're doing. We're out and about. He's looking for owls there, and we're in the field. He loves being outside. I've got this because it's a tool. It's not my friend. It's not my window on the world. It's a tool. This is just a spanner that
More
connects
than
to the
that, more
internet.
than that, we're a cyborg with it. We've reached that level
We are.
where
We are.
I mean, the next phase um, would be, I mean, we're wearing them. I'm not wearing an iWatch now, but we used to carry it in our pocket. Now we're wearing it. I have no doubt that eventually we'll start surgically implanting things.
We're
But
doing it, aren't we? Hasn't
we're
Musk
doing
just
it,
done the
yeah.
chip? So,
Probably. But
yeah,
even with it in your pocket, you're a cyborg.
indeed.
It's low
Well,
back. It's low back.
spectacles. Spectacles, medieval Europe, the scriptoria of medieval Europe. The first monks put spectacles on. That's the first cyborg. We augmented our
We
eyesight.
augmented it, right? Yeah. So
So we've been doing it. It's just, again, your glasses are a servant. They allow you to maintain the sight of your youth, etc. We need to look at artificial general intelligence for that because if it's going to detect your cancer, so the thing, if you've got your Apple Watch on, if you've got your Fitbit on, so long as you've worn it for decades so it can get rid of the noise, it'll be able to predict your heart attack 2 weeks before it happens.
wow.
Book
Okay.
you in for the surgery, you'll go in, the nanobots will crawl through your system, fix everything, and you'll have never even known it was happening. It'd probably be
See
something you do in your lunch hour.
that's great.
So
That's
it's
great.
this, it's like it always is. If you want a flame under a saucepan to cook your dinner, it's fantastic. If you come home and the house is on fire, it's catastrophic. But it's the same flame. It's how you've leveraged the flame that matters. Are you the master or are you the servant of that flame? And it's the same for the intelligence is we're going to need a kill switch. Definitely going to need a kill switch. It can't be something that Tom Cruise has to jump into a tank of water to access. It needs to be on a wall where anybody can grab it and pull it.
Push this if it goes south. Yeah.
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 If unhappy, press is what we need. But also, there is no going back. If you think about it, if we went back 20 years, there's no MRI scanners. My
Mm,
mother would have never have survived her 2 strokes without that technology. There's
mm.
no pharmaceuticals like a clotbuster or whatever. She never would have done that. But if we go all the way back to my mother's childhood, if it hadn't have been for pharmaceutical developments, she never would have survived polio, which she had as a very young girl. So we want all of the technologies. We want to have a life where we've got personalized healthcare, personalized nutrition, etc., etc. But what we don't want to do is lose the personability of a personalized existence.
You've got that photograph of your son there on your phone. When presumably as a family you were out walking. And we do that as well. My wife and I, my family, we love to walk. We had one on the weekend. It was great. I have a rule. when we go for a walk. No phones. We don't bring them. So I haven't got that photograph because I've got no phone in which to take that photograph. Um, that for me, that's a success because I know we did it. It's up here. I don't need to see a photograph reminding me that we did it. So
I'm not such a fan of draconian measures. So,
let,
for instance, my
let me just
children don't have a phone, but for me, because mum's with us, because mum
yeah,
has dementia, I
okay.
need some way to be in contact. So she fell this morning, as it happens, but I was at home. She's fine,
I'm
but she
sorry to hear
fell.
that. Yeah,
She's 89.
yeah.
Things happen. So they're with us, but I'm not the sort of person. I don't, other than LinkedIn, which is a professional thing that I use as part of my business, I have no social media at all. So the phone rarely rings, so it's usually important. My wife's not the one for nattering on the phone, so it's rare. So when we go out, usually our phone is used for taking photographs. Maybe if we get lost, it's used as a wayfinder, although we mostly carry paper maps because Teddy likes to read them.
Brilliant.
So we don't tend to have any rules. What I like with Teddy is it's a tool that's used when it's needed as a tool, but it's not the thing I'm staring at while you're trying to have a conversation with me. So
Yeah.
it's never on the table at dinner. It's never something I'm looking at whilst Teddy's calling for me to go and play, or Chloe wants a hot chocolate or whatever. It's just another tool. But in the same way that I don't lock my shoes away when I get home from work so that I'm unable to leave the house and I'll be with my family, I don't lock away the technology either. We just have
So
a very healthy relationship with it.
I'm with that. I mean, in particular with you, Alan, with your mother, and I understand that you need to have the ability to call someone if something happens. So that's fine. Especially if you're still getting the same level of enjoyment out of the walk, that's fine. It's very unique to me. I find I'm much more relaxed when I haven't got the temptation of it in my pocket. If I remove that temptation, I just automatically, even if I'm disciplined enough never to get the phone out during the walk, I don't use it, and I have been in that situation. I'm more relaxed. I'm still more relaxed when I don't have it at all. So what I often do is I'll say to my wife, bring your phone, just so we've got the means to communicate or buy something or whatever if we're on the web. But I like to not have it. I like to be completely unplugged and completely remove that temptation for an hour or however long. But
Yeah.
going back to it, where I was really going with that was it kind of goes back to how we started this. Really, we've come full circle. Um, Everything that we've discussed, I think it's down to taste, the individual's taste, but I think a universal fixed point is it's that moment, it's that enjoying the walk that life's all about. And I wouldn't
Well,
want
there
to.
is only now.
There is only now, and I wouldn't want to lose that feeling that you get well, before, during, and after that walk. I'm totally with you that AGI is we should look upon AGI, and we probably will in many years to come, as we looked upon as you said, the washing machine. Great example. They're just tools, but it's life's an emotional experience. And what you
Certainly
want that
is.
experience to be is your choice, and that's wonderful. But I think we can't. I think that's a universal fixed point. Life is an emotional experience, and relative to yourself, you need to take these tools and have them aid you in that emotional experience. To
They
kind of
are
sum it up
they
a
are
little bit with,
tools. It's the exact word. They're
yeah,
tools. And what they have to do is they have to serve humanity. What they cannot do is encroach upon humanity's ability to be humane.
couldn't agree more. Alan, that's more than an hour. I think that's have you got to go?
No, I just
Someone
we
come in? Are
could
you
have
looking?
talked for days. So I think we've done rather well at an hour.
I do too. I do too. Let's do this again if you're up for it, of course.
Definitely, always. And let's do it over an international internet connection from your new country of origin.
Yeah, let's do that. That sounds great. That sounds really good. It really has been. It's been, like I say, it's been a good hour. It's been a great conversation. I feel great. I feel a little wiser after it. I really appreciate you coming on. So, joking aside, I do hope you come on again because, because like the walk we just described. These conversations for me are in the same category. They really, really are. I can have my robots doing everything for me right now, but I don't want to lose this. I don't want to lose this.
Yes.
This is, for me, this is living. So thank you. I really appreciate your time. Thank you
I
so
very
much.
much enjoyed it too. Thank you very much for the invite, Tom.
You're very welcome. It's been an honor. Really, it has. Thanks, Alan.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Okay, stay on, stay on, stay on. So I'm going to stop recording now.
Okay.